Hello and welcome to another Bobby Fischer video. In 1972, Bobby Fischer was crowned king of the chess world by winning the World Chess Championship. And here's a game from that World Chess Championship that took place in Reykjavik, Iceland. And Bobby Fischer has the white pieces here. He was known for almost always playing e4, but here he starts out with c4. So he changed things up in this World Chess Championship, and I'm sure that helped to confuse his opponent, Boris Spassky of Russia. And after this move, c4, this is the English opening. And, not something that Bobby Fischer played very often in his career. And now we have e6, a common move in the English opening. This is probably more of a waiting move to see what Bobby Fischer would do. It's more flexible, instead of just immediately playing c5. So now we have knight f3, and Bobby Fischer returns the favor, playing a flexible developing move, controlling squares in the center with this knight, getting closer to being able to castle on the king side. And Spassky immediately strikes in the center, pushing to d5, attacking the unprotected pawn. And Fischer pushes his pawn to d4. And now we've transposed into a queen's gambit declined. So what will Spassky do with this? Well, he continues in normal queen's gambit declined fashion, developing his knight. Fischer develops the other knight. So we're going deep into a queen's gambit, although now the computer's saying that we've transposed back into the English opening Anglo-Indian queen's knight variation. But often in the queen's gambit, you'll have knight to c3 along with knight to f3. That can be played. So here, bishop develops. And once again, now it says queen's gambit declined, three knights variation. Because a lot of times this pawn will develop up here, trying to pin that knight to the queen, and the bishop will develop to e7 here to break that pin. So usually this bishop wants to develop outside of the pawn chain after this pawn pushes to e3. So what will Fischer do here? He does indeed bring the bishop up to g5, the modern variation of the queen's gambit decline. That's where we are at the moment. So castling and e3. So the bishop is outside of the pawn chain here, this bad bishop. Fischer, after the bishop has the question put to it, will it retreat or will it trade? Fischer keeps the bishop pair for the moment. And now Spassky decides to play, this pawn push where the bishop that is a problem, his own bad bishop, blocked by these pawns in the center. It could develop here or here even. So now we have capture, recapture, and the bishops are traded off here. Knights are traded off. And if we look at the position, we have, now this is transposed to the queen's gambit decline Tartakower Makaganov exchange variation. So you always have to be aware of transpositional possibilities when you're playing. Make sure that you don't start in one opening and transpose into something that you're not as comfortable with. And perhaps that's what Bobby Fischer did here against his opponent. And now the half-open e-file could possibly be used by black, whereas Fischer has the half-open c-file to conduct some operations. The game continues with, sure enough, the rook lining up on this half-open c-file. And now we have bishop centralizing. I mean, maybe there could have been a possibility of putting the bishop here and then trying to exchange off these bishops. But if Fischer were to capture, the knight would end up on the edge of the board. And maybe that wouldn't be so great for Spassky. So now, queen to a4. And we're in a book move here, even though we're, 12 moves into the game. So here, this move prevents the knight from jumping here, although, the rook is doing that as well. So let's see what happens. Pawn presses forward. Another book move. Queen drops back, pinning that pawn to the unprotected queen. So now that can't be captured at the moment. So Spassky brings his rook over for the coming fight on this c-file. Now we have the first move out of book here, bishop to b5. Apparently this is good, but bishop to e2 may be better according to the computer. So this move allows the pawn to attack, but now the queen is pinning that rook, preventing it from capturing the bishop. So what does Fischer do? He goes ahead and captures. Now after the recapture, we have king castling. The other rook is activated. Rooks are connected. This rook could possibly land on the half-open D file. Rook to a7. An inaccuracy. Apparently, queen to a7 would have been a better move, and that would have kept black with a slight edge. So Fischer drops his bishop back to e2, which the computer earlier mentioned that was a good spot for that bishop. And now we have knight finally developing off the back rank, helping protect this pawn along with the rook and queen. And maybe that queen can move out of the line of fire from Fischer's queen. So now knight jumps forward once again because the pawn cannot capture, because Fischer is not only pinning that pawn to the queen, but also the rook is attacking rook here, pinning that pawn to the unprotected rook. So queen to f8, dropping back, protecting the rook. Queen is protected. Now there is a threat on that knight. So Fischer knocks out the bishop, and after recapture, we have a bishop versus knight endgame, which usually favors the bishop when there are pawns on both sides of the board, as there is in this one, because the bishop can get to one side or the other on the board faster than the knight. So the game continues with Fischer pushing forward here, the best move in the position, and white is the equivalent of half a pawn ahead here. The best move is knight to f6. Second best would be to capture that pawn, but if that's done, then you'll have doubled isolated pawns, two isolated pawns over here on the queen side. It would kind of wreck the pawns in the center. So Spassky instead pushes forward here, trying to run his passed pawn forward, but bishop and queen at the moment are doing a good job of stopping that pawn. One issue is, if they try to get this pawn moving, well then Fischer could capture there, and the knight or king would have to capture, because the rook would want to keep guarding. Also, you have bishop and rook piling up there. So that was a miss. Best would have been, now they're saying it would have been better to capture. But look at that. If you capture, you're left with all these doubled isolated pawns here. the pawns are just not looking good. And here the best move would be queen to e3 maybe to immediately target this e4 pawn. And it'd be hard to defend it. You would probably have to bring the knight up to defend it, but then this other pawn would be hard to defend as well. So, in the game, we had d4. Spassky pushes forward. Fischer finds a great move, pushing his f pawn, gaining space. The rook is lined up on that queen, so that maybe that pawn could keep pushing here. Also this pawn could push forward and prevent the knight from landing here. Queen gets out of the line of fire of the rook. So now we have the pawn pushing forward, preventing the knight from moving forward here. So what does Spassky do next? Well, he plays an inaccuracy. Rook to b8, grabbing the half-open file. This move doesn't seem too terrible, but apparently knight to b6 would have been better. Maybe with the idea of helping push this backwards pawn forward. So now bishop lands on this little outpost here, holding the backward pawn back here. And, now the knight, could move here, targeting the bishop. Let's see what Spassky does. He takes time out to move his king into the corner, and that's because the bishop was lined up on the king there. Now you'll notice that a pattern with high-level chess players. I saw it in the the 2024 World Chess Championship between Ding Liren and Gukesh, where often they would line pieces up, less valuable pieces, on the more valuable pieces. Like this bishop lined up on the king. Even though there were pieces in between, you never know when that lining up of one piece on another could be an advantage once pieces start flying off the board. So, queen, here we go. Another example of lining up on the more valuable piece. So the queen targets that king. And so also we have the queen and bishop piling up on this pawn, and only the queen is protecting that. So knight drops back to help defend, but what's the saying? A knight on the rim is dim. Also, this pawn is unprotected. Will Spassky even have a chance to go after that? Let's find out. No. Fischer pushes forward, protects his bishop, relieving that rook of guard duty. But, the rook will probably stay here to keep an eye on this backwards pawn. Fischer, could have the option of swinging over here, creating a battery, targeting that pawn. So now Spassky pushes his isolated pawn forward, maybe trying to trade it off and create an isolated pawn over here on Fischer's queen side. So pawn pushes forward, adding another attacker. Excuse me. All right. So now we have queen, bishop, pawn all piling up here. It looks like Spassky will probably be forced to capture. Does he capture here? Yes. He knocks that pawn out. Rook captures here. So now there's a possibility of doubling the rooks up on this open F file. So the knight repositions here after no longer having to perform guard duty. But now we have rooks doubling on the open F file. The queen drops back. And, we have knight, queen, and rook all guarding this back rank. Fischer was known as a good attacker of his opponent's back rank. So, you always have to keep an eye on that. Also, this bishop is restricting the king from being able to move towards the center. There is a possible threat maybe of pushing here and targeting Fischer's queen. So Fischer gets out of the future possible line of fire, of that knight. Game continues with the rook getting in front of this passed pawn of Fischer's. And Fischer was also, a great endgame player. He was very good at being able to push his passed pawn for advantage in the endgame. And let's see if that will be the case with this passed e5 pawn here. So Fischer gains space on the queen or on the king side here, and now rooks double here on Spassky's second rank, helping to guard this pawn in case of some future attack. And now we have that passed pawn pushing further up the board, and the further a passed pawn can make it up the board, the more dangerous it can become, as long as it has ample protection. That bishop's doing a good job of protecting it. Let's see what Spassky does next. Well, he remaneuvers his rook, protecting this pawn, which was under attack by the rook here. It was unprotected. So the game continues with Fischer lining up once again on the opponent's king. And now we have queen helping to pile up on that passed pawn. Fischer pushes on the queen side, gaining space, equalizing space there between the pawns. Let's see how things continue. Spassky shuffling his queen, maybe not sure what to do here. He is behind the passed pawn, so maybe he's going to try and threaten to push that passed pawn up the board. So rook presses forward, giving the king the option maybe to head over here towards that passed pawn and blockade if needed. Game continues with Spassky just shuffling his queen back and forth. So the game commences with Fischer pressing his rook forward, also keeping an eye along with the bishop on this square in front of the passed pawn. Also, from f3, the rook can guard the b3 pawn, relieving the bishop of guard duty. Maybe that bishop will be needed to either move here and attack the queen. Let's see what Fischer has in mind. First, Spassky just shuffling that queen back and forth, in super defensive mode here. Just waiting to see how Fischer will continue the game. How will Fischer press forward here? The bishop drops back, lining up on the knight, and now we have that queen just shuffling back and forth. It seems that Spassky is somewhat paralyzed at the moment, not really having much that he can do. So Fischer drops his queen back, and now there's a battery with this threat of capturing the knight with a mate here if that rook moves forward with check. But if that happens, the knight could just capture and guard here. So what else does Fischer have available? At this moment, Spassky's losing. It's like +8, if knight to f6 is played, which that is played. So this is not looking good, because capture with the mate threat here. But if the if the knight is captured, pawn could capture, and then the rook will block that mate threat. So crazy attack here by Fischer. He does play the brilliant move sacrificing the exchange here. After capture, the rook is now preventing that mate in 1 there. So capture, and rook is now in a position to target this pawn, delivering a check. And it's starting to look really serious here for Spassky. He moves to g8, and now we have bishop lining up on the king, helping protect the passed pawn. Spassky just shuffles his king back over. So now queen to f4 here. And this is where Spassky resigned. Because there's a mate in 7, mate in 6, mate in 5. There are different mating opportunities here. This is where the game ended. I'll look at the percentages on the game review, and then I'll come right back and we can see how the game could have ended. So here are the percentages. Look at this chart here. The game was even until Fischer just slowly started gaining an advantage that just skyrocketed until he won. Now, Fischer played with an awesome 96.5% accuracy rating versus 87.1 by Spassky. Fischer had a brilliant move and a great move, but this is even more amazing. Fischer had no inaccuracies, no mistakes, no misses or blunders. Boris Spassky did have 3 inaccuracies and 1 missed opportunity. Fischer played at the equivalent of a 3,000 rating level versus 2,450 by Spassky. And now, in the opening, Fischer played with 100% accuracy, as did Spassky, 100% accuracy. But now Fischer played 95.6% accuracy in the middle game versus only 82.8 by Spassky. So, that is where Fischer broke through and won. So let's see how the game could have continued. With best play, it looks like, they recommend queen to g8. Which doesn't look so good, but anyway, I'll play that first because that's the longest way, the way to survive the longest, I should say. So here, the best moves are either rook to f8, pinning the queen to the king, or, so if you don't play rook to f8, your other option is queen to e5, lining up on the king. Wow. And then they recommend just capturing here, giving up your queen. So, I don't know. That all looks terrible. So let's see what else could have been played. You'd think you would want to try and guard this if you played... Wow, yeah, it's not looking good no matter what. Let's say you played this move, for example, to help guard that so it can't be captured with check. Well, then you're going to have this, forking the king and the queen here. So that's just awful, leading to a mate in 2. So what's another option? What if the queen dropped up or shot up here? Something like that. Well, then once again, you're going to play rook to f8, king up to h7. Oh, but then that would allow the bishop to join the action like that. And if the king goes here, there's a mate with queen to f6. Yeah, so no matter what, it just looks bad. You know, after this position here, there's not much Spassky can do because you have rook and queen both targeting this. There's a threat of forking on this square, forking the king and the queen. You know, we could look at the best move. It said that that was best. Okay, but then that allows queen or rook takes h6. So let's say the queen marches up there and captures. Well, now you have what? Rook to c6 or c8. Yeah, just none of it looks good. All right, I'm not going to drag this out. You can look at things further on your own if you like. Feel free to leave any comments. I love hearing from viewers and subscribers. You know, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them. You know, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. So thank you for watching and have a super chess day.